At the start of 1917, the Russian Empire is still governed by an autocratic Tsar. From his palace in St. Petersburg, one man rules over 170 million people, answerable only to God. Nicholas II holds more power than any other monarch in Europe. He has resisted political change. But the Tsar's days are numbered. Workers, discontented and hungry, go on strike in St. Petersburg. Russia has been fighting in the First World War for nearly 3 years, and the Tsar's huge armies become demoralized and disaffected. They've suffered defeat after defeat. In February, a first revolution takes place. A provisional government takes over. The Tsar abdicates and is arrested. What happens next will change the course of history. Russians believed they'd won their freedom at last. In the euphoria, soldiers, whose mutiny had helped bring down the Tsar, celebrated with workers. Most people expected elections and an assembly to decide the future. Lenin, leader of the small Bolshevik party, wanted more revolutionary change and his own type of Marxist socialism. First, he built up popular support by promising to end the war, give land to the peasants, and power to the workers. In October, the Bolsheviks decided they were ready to seize power. Among Lenin's supporters was a young poet, Alexander Bryansky.
Take to the streets, rise up, raise your hammer, forge happiness for the world. End the bowing and scraping, go boldly, shine, rejoice.
On October the 25th, the Bolsheviks moved on the Winter Palace, where the provisional government was based. Bryansky was with them.
On Lenin's advice, the sailors put on the uniforms of Winter Palace employees. They worked their way into the building through back entrances, attics and roofs.
On a warship behind the Winter Palace, Bolshevik sailors waited to give a signal for the final stages of the coup.
When the aurora fired, everyone rushed forward, shouting hurrah. We climbed over the gates and broke into the Winter Palace. I was at the front. I ran up the stairs and stumbled into a big hall where there was a whole detachment of officer cadets with their rifles at the ready. I shouted, "Throw down your rifles." And they threw down their weapons as if to order. They'd seen how angry we were.
Later, the taking of the Winter Palace was reconstructed on film by the revolutionaries' own director, Sergei Eisenstein, in a highly dramatized version. In reality, there was little resistance. Only 5 were killed. But the film account of a mass storming helped establish a central myth for the revolution, a heroic story of how the workers seized power. The same night, Lenin spoke to the workers' revolutionary councils, setting out his vision. He told them Russia had turned a new page, leading to the victory of socialism. From now on, he said, the oppressed masses will themselves form the government. Outside the hall, many were frightened by what the Bolsheviks might do. But the early believers were excited by Lenin's message and full of hope.
Что будущее России пойдет по другому пути, по пути власть.
I thought that the future of Russia would take a different path, that the people would exercise power through the workers and soldiers and Soviets. Everyone would work wherever they were, free from exploitation.
Свободным от всякой эксплуатации.
Ну, мне нравилось, что эта теория обещает в будущем.
What I liked was the promise of a happy, classless society in the future, in which everyone would enjoy all the good created by the society.
Благами, что создает общество.
Потому что меня что привлекало? Справедливость.
I was attracted by the idea of justice, equality between people, acting in the name of humanity.
Действия всех наших структур ради человека.
The Bolsheviks moved the capital from St. Petersburg to Moscow soon after the revolution. They took Russia out of the war. The Tsar and his family were shot. And from Moscow, they planned to extend the revolution to the rest of the world. A forceful message was sent to workers everywhere. If the proletariat in other countries followed the communist way, they could kick out kings and capitalists and achieve a world with no more war. Harry Young went to Moscow in a delegation from the tiny British Communist Party.
And Zinoviev, who was the chairman, said the next speaker will be Comrade Lenin. Hit a pin drop. Dead silence, vast hall, 3,000 people from all over the world. And a little man, or not much bigger than me, broader-shouldered, with rather Mongolian-looking face, very bald head, little whiskers there. And he got up and he just leaned over like a podium, you know, there's a corner, like that. And he just talked to him like a Dutch uncle.
Во всем мире растет союз коммунистов. В ряде стран победила уже советская власть. Еще недолго, и мы увидим победу коммунизма во всем мире. Мы увидим основание Всемирной Федеративной Республики Советов.
I thought he had set the scene for the World Revolution, and that the Bolshevik Party would successfully lead it. That next would be Germany, then France, then Italy.
In the ferment after the First World War, others tried to follow the Bolshevik example. In Berlin, communists tried to seize power. In Munich, they succeeded briefly. In Hungary, a Soviet republic lasted several months. But success was short-lived. Every communist uprising was crushed. And back in Russia itself, the Bolsheviks had to fight for their own survival in a vicious civil war with supporters of the old regime who were helped by Western governments. By 1921, the Bolsheviks were victorious, but the party who claimed to speak for the people had never had majority support. Lenin had created a large secret police force to kill and terrorize his opponents. After the Civil War, the Bolsheviks, now calling themselves the Communists, tried to win over the mass of people. They became masters of modern propaganda. From the wagons of special agit-prop trains, party workers acted out political dramas. On the trains, many Russians saw their first ever films with an optimistic message about the future. Posters put across the central ideas of communism, as conceived by the 19th century German Karl Marx and adapted by Lenin. At the heart was the idea of class struggle. In the past, the capitalists had exploited the downtrodden workers. Now the proletariat was to take control. In the factories, workers' representatives would make the decisions. The idea of profit would be abandoned. The fruits of toil would be hospitals, housing, and schools. And it would be for communists themselves, the real believers, to lead the way to this radiant future. Mikhail Mindlin was working in a Moscow factory.
Не надо было говорить особенные слова.
We didn't need special words. We weren't going to discuss the theory of building communism.
Только личный пример.
Setting a personal example. We considered this the most important thing in all our work, in the Komsomol and in the factories. So people would say, look, that must be a communist. Why? Well, look how he's working.
Почему? Потому что вон, смотри, как работает.
Russia's peasants, 80% of the population, were furthest behind in the new society. Thanks to the revolution, many now farmed land taken from the landowners. But their living standards were well behind the rest of Europe. Few were literate. In 1920, the new government decreed that all Soviet citizens were to be taught to read. Teams of young activists were sent to the country.
Мы, значит, ходили, молодежь, переписали всех неграмм, просто из дома.
We went from house to house in search of illiterate people. We made a note of their names.
Потом, значит, составляли
We then found suitable rooms to hold classes in.
И проводили занятия.
Learning to write would open new possibilities to those trapped at the bottom of society. One woman who couldn't come to the classes because of her child at home was helped by Anastasia Denisova.
Я сказала, что вот тебе учебник, вот будешь заниматься, я буду к тебе.
I said, here's a textbook for you. I'll come to you so you can learn to read at home.
Она держит одной рукой держит.
I remember vividly that when the baby cried, she carried on writing with one hand while she rocked him with the other.
Она желанием занималась. Это же
She was so keen to study. I'll always remember her striving for knowledge and enlightenment. It was immense.
Просто-напросто была огромная.
To produce the engineers and technicians the new society needed, training was expanded. And the communists said women should have equality with men, with equal pay. Ella Shishcha was one of a new generation of women.
Когда Ленин сказал, стране нужна электрификация, а коммунизм это совет.
When Lenin said that communism is Soviet power plus electrification, I decided that I should become an electrical engineer, that was my holy duty.
И не просто стать инженером-электриком, там, проектировать.
And I didn't want to just draw up plans. I wanted to build an electric power station. That was my mission, and I achieved it.
Она давала мне.
The revolution gave me the right to feel equal to any man. It gave me the right to work, to study what I wanted to study.
Она давала мне право трудиться, учиться так, как я хочу.
The 1920s saw an explosion of new thinking in every field. Architects put up public buildings that broke with bourgeois styles. And musicians experimented too. Izo Dekcha was part of a bold experiment that took the idea of equality to new lengths. He played in a new Moscow orchestra in which the musicians were so equal that no conductor was needed. To achieve this solidarity and harmony, the musicians had to sit facing one another.
В начале революции, когда произошло, было очень тяжело жить.
Life was very hard for musicians at the beginning of the revolution. The conductors didn't treat them well at all. But the founder of the orchestra said that it was the musician who mattered, and that he should liberate himself from the fetters of the conductor.
In the first symphony orchestra without an oppressive leader, musical decisions were taken collectively.
If you didn't like something, you all had a vote. For instance, if you couldn't hear the clarinets, you told them the truth. You're behind. You're not coming in on time. Or you have to play this bit like this.
Давай, вот это место надо играть так. Кто за, кто против?
Who's in favor? Who's against? This wouldn't happen in an orchestra with a conductor. It was a real innovation.
But despite all the talk about equality, the Russian masses did have a conductor who directed everything, and it was Lenin. By the time he died, he had created a one-party, one-ideology state and an elaborate system of control. But under Lenin, the aim of socialism had not yet been achieved. His successor, Joseph Stalin, inherited a society in which large parts of the old Russia survived. Peasants were still able to sell the produce they farmed themselves in the markets. Stalin was determined to complete the building of socialism. So he launched the first five-year plan to modernize the economy. It was a call for mobilization to create the heavy industries the Soviet Union needed to defend itself in a hostile world. Construction worker Tatyana Fyodorova was held up as an example to others.
We live so well. Our hearts are so joyful. In no other country are there such happy young people as us. We're the happiest young people. And on behalf of all young people, I want to thank our party and our dear comrade Stalin for this joy that we have. Stalin set a task. Build this or build that. And thanks to the fact that people trusted him and this enthusiasm of young people, it was possible. Remember, this was a country where people were illiterate, lived in virtual darkness. wore birch bark shoes. Even now, I think it's like something out of a fairy tale. How was it possible at one of the most difficult times to raise these great construction sites? It was only possible through the unity of the people and the love of the people for their idol. Because for us, Stalin was an idol.
With so much to build so quickly, workers were sent all over the country to fulfill the plan. Tens of thousands went beyond the Ural Mountains to start construction of a giant new steelworks. They saw themselves as pioneers. For Valentina Mikova and Mikhail Arkhipov, these were the most fulfilling days of their lives.
На строительстве домен был один экскаватор, и то плохой.
There was one excavator at the blast furnace building site, and it wasn't always reliable. So we dug all the foundations by hand. The trench would be teeming with people. One takes the earth, throws it to the level above. The second person throws it to the third to the fourth, up to 5 or 6 levels. That was how we got the earth out of the trench. Then it was taken away in wheelbarrows.
Magnitogorsk was modeled on a plant in America. Among the workers were thousands of forced laborers, and all lived in terrible conditions.
The beds were in one large room, shared by up to 200 people, often whole families together. There were wooden lavatories outside and a communal kitchen. Water was rationed, and we had to get that outside as well. I think that we, the first construction workers of Magnitogorsk, were united by the difficulties we all faced. We were already schooled in our Soviet traditions. We felt the whole economy was ours, that we were the bosses, that we were working for ourselves.
The burst of construction and spending in the Soviet Union came at the time of the Great Depression in the West. Many of the jobless liked what they heard about communism. It sounded like a worker's paradise.
I became a communist in short because of what I saw around me here in the United States of America. There was misery, there were children going to bed hungry, there was poverty, and there was no reason for it. We were the richest country in the world, and I saw communists out on the streets demonstrating and trying to do something about it. And that would sum up why I joined the Communist Party. Well, I believe what was going on in the Soviet Union was a noble experiment. You stop and think for a moment of what is the aim of socialism? It's to end all exploitation. It's to put an end to wars. It's to build a system of cooperation instead of confrontation. It's to do away with the extremely rich on one side and the extremely poor on the other side.
The Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw toured the Soviet Union, visiting factories and farms with Lady Astor. Shaw wrote in a hotel visitor's book, Tomorrow I leave this land of hope and return to our Western countries of despair. When he got back, he claimed Russia had been maligned.
We have rebuked her ungodliness, and now the sun shines on Russia as on a country with which God is well pleased, whilst his wrath is heavy on us, and we don't know where to turn for comfort or approval.
Soviet newsreels showed Stalin as a genial figure, head of the family of nationalities who made up the new workers' state. But he was ruthless with anyone who challenged him. He demanded cooperation at all levels. For millions of Russians, the church was still a source of strength and offered the only alternative system of beliefs. The communists saw the church as a challenge and intensified their attacks on it. Village priests were ridiculed and harassed and forced to renounce their faith. Israel Chernitsky was a communist activist in his village in the Ukraine.
Пришел батюшка, снял себя рясу, да, и положил на стул.
The priest came in, took off his cassock and put it on the table. They called the barber, and he cut off his hair. And the priest announced, "There is no God. I've lied to you." The peasant sitting there cried out, "How could you? We built you a house, and now you're saying there's no God."
The greatest threat to the life of the peasants came when Stalin decided to end private farming. He thought their methods were too inefficient to raise the food the country now needed. A campaign was organized against the richer peasants, the so-called kulaks, who were said to be opposing Stalin's plans. Kulak farmers were rounded up.
Зашли мы в дом, комиссия, человек 5-6, я уже не помню. И секретарь партизации.
We went into the house, the commission of 5 or 6 people, and the secretary of the party organization announced, "According to the decision of our meeting, your family is de-kulakized. Put all your valuables on the table. I warn you, no hysterics. I've got strong nerves. We'll stand firm." A woman burst into tears and cursed the authorities.
Stalin said the kulaks should be liquidated as a class. Over 3 million were shot or died in exile or the camps. The state seized the farm implements of all the peasants. They took over all land, which was now to be farmed collectively in large units. But the peasants didn't want collectivization. They killed their livestock rather than give them up, and the state took the grain. The result was famine. Over 5 years, 7 million died of starvation. These were scenes that Bernard Shaw and other Western visitors did not see. Pelagia Ovcharenko was almost taken by the body collectors.
3 people came to the house. One tended the horses. 2 were piling up corpses on the cart. They threw on my mother. They threw on my father. My father gestured to me. The man said, "He's almost ready. He's almost dead." When my father gestured, I knew I had to go and hide. The men swore. They couldn't find me because I'd crawled away on my hands and knees and hidden myself. Corpses were piled up like bales of straw. The men took the cart to a big hole and tipped the bodies in, regardless of whether they were dead or alive.
The price was not mentioned when Stalin listed socialism's achievements in 1937.
На наших фабриках и заводах работает весь капиталист. Работают труженики фабрик и заводов. Руководят фабриками и заводами люди из народа. Это и называется у нас социализмом на деле. На наших полях работают труженики земли, без помещиков, без кулаков. Руководят этими работами люди из народа. Это и называется у нас социализмом в быту.
It was said Stalin's ovations were so long because nobody dared to be seen as the first to stop clapping. For Stalin was not just using harsh methods to push through changes he thought were essential. He was obsessed with destroying all potential opponents. The leader of the first workers' state lived in reclusive comfort. He felt insecure even about those closest to him. One by one, the most senior communists who had planned the political and social transformation of the country became his victims. Nikolai Bukharin had helped Stalin to power, but then dared to criticize him. At first, Bukharin was isolated in his Kremlin flat with his young wife. He remained a loyal communist even when the moment of arrest came.
It was terrifying, tragic. He literally fell down on his knees before me and asked forgiveness for ruining my life. He said that if he could ever have imagined that his life would end this way, he would have run as far as possible away from me. No matter how strong his love, he would have suppressed it. He asked me never to forget his letter, which is now called his testament, and without fail to bring up his son a Bolshevik. That's the kind of faith he had, a Bolshevik to the end.
Садитесь, пожалуйста.
Bukharin's fate was sealed at one of a series of show trials, specially designed as propaganda events to create fear and instill obedience. The trials were a concoction of fake evidence and false accusations. Confessions were forced through torture and threats to the victims' families. Officials and journalists in the courtroom played their part in the same drama. Boris Yefimov, who attended Bukharin's trial as a newspaper cartoonist, says he believed the confession he heard was genuine.
How could I doubt it if with my own ears I heard Bukharin describe himself as an enemy? How he had planned to overthrow Soviet power, to hand over the Ukraine to the Germans. How he told of his betrayal.
Свергнуть советскую власть, отдать Украину немцам, Приморье японцам, рассказывал про свою измену.
What would you have said in my place if you'd heard a man confess his crimes with your own ears?
Если бы своими ушами слышали, как человек признается в своих...
It was a kind of hypnosis.
Это было какой-то, так сказать, гипноз.
Вся наша страна от малого до старого ждет и требует одного – изменников и шпионов, продавших врагу нашу родину, расстрелять, как поганых псов.
In his cartoons for Pravda, Yefimov obediently took up the prosecutor's description of the accused as vile dogs.
Это была у него какая-то фраза о том, что вот Троцкий и Бухарин, это вот...
He'd used this phrase that Trotsky and Bukharin were one creature, a two-headed creature, the mad dog of fascism.
Но они, в общем, это одно и то же. Это...
It's an example of satire serving propaganda.
Фашизма. Вот это пример...
Every simple, I won't say fool, but every simple person could understand it.
Я не скажу дураку, но каждому простому человеку это понятно.
Yefimov applauded when the death penalty was pronounced.
When they read out his death sentence, something snapped inside me. I felt that I'd changed, that the lights over our wonderful Soviet Union were extinguished.
Я изменилась, померк и весь наш прекрасный Советский Союз.
Stalin's morbid paranoia grew. Nobody at any level of life in the country, regardless of whether they were in the party or not, was safe. From his desk, the Great Terror was controlled and conducted. Secret police orders gave every region an arbitrary quota for the purges. Category 1 meant death. Category 2 meant the prison camps. But at times Stalin grew impatient. When he scribbled, "Give a supplementary quota of 6,000 people in the first category to Krasnodar," he was signing the death warrant for an extra 6,000 on top of the previous target. The purges struck many of the earliest enthusiasts for communism. Mikhail Mindlin, in Category 2, was arrested and interrogated by the secret police in Moscow.
И начался конвейер, начали, чтобы я подписал.
When the interrogation began, I was asked to sign lies about myself and good comrades from my region. They handed me a list of 47 people.
Очень много хороших, 47 человек мне список предъявили. Они добивались, чтобы я подписал это в
They wanted to get me to sign a statement. I wouldn't. They kept me standing for 5 days. Day and night. My legs were so swollen.
У меня ноги распухли.
At the height of the purges, ordinary people were required to take part in mass demonstrations against enemies of the people. Yet some, who'd been most devoted to Stalin, were still blind to what was going on. Ella Shistya, the young electrical engineer, couldn't believe what her husband, a party official, told her.
Он понимал, он знал то, чего я не знала.
He understood. He knew what I didn't know.
Когда он мне говорил как-то за столом, он мне сказал,
When he said, "You can't imagine it, Stalin is shooting all the present members of the Politburo," and he counted them off one by one.
Зиновьев, Каменев, Бухарин, Рыков, Томский, перечислил целый ряд.
I couldn't bear it. We were having lunch.
I picked up a knife and threw it at him.
Я не выдержала. У меня в руках был...
Thank goodness I missed him, but that was what was happening at the time. Stalin was shooting them all.
К счастью, я не попала.
She broke with her first husband over this slur. Later, he was purged and killed. She fell in love with and married a second man who still shared her unquestioning adoration for Stalin, but he too was purged. Then, as the wife of an enemy of the people, Ella Shishcha was herself arrested and sentenced to prison in Siberia. She was sent with a party of other women crammed into goods wagons. With nothing but salt fish to eat, she developed a desperate thirst.
Вот я помню, как я слизывала, ведь мороз был сильный.
I remember when there was a hard frost.
Гайки, болты, которые...
Inside the wooden cattle truck, I used to lick the ice off the metal screws and bolts, fearing only that my tongue would stick. That's how we traveled, for about a month.
Ехали мы около месяца.
Though their husbands had been killed before they left Moscow, the women were convinced they were in the railway wagon just behind them. As the train went east, they sang a song to their men, hoping they'd hear.
Это мы, ваши жены, подруги, это мы нашу песню поем. Из Москвы по сибирской дороге вместе с вами этапом идем. Прочитали в бутырках нам приговор, дали каждой жене 8 лет и, вручивши конвою пакеты, повезли нас по 100 человек. Было тяжко в холодной теплушке, ели только мы рыбный кондер. У конвоя выпрашивали свечку, не теряя былой свой задор.
Mass shipments of prisoners continued for years. They filled thousands of camps in the remotest and most inhospitable parts of the Soviet Union. Prisoners became an essential part of the workforce, slave labor for the new mines and railways, being forced through regardless.
First I worked on the BAM railway, then in Kolyma. The important thing was not to die of hunger.
Баланду тебе давали, баланда это суп без всякой, ну там плавает.
They gave you balanda, a soup with just a few fish bones and some oats floating around.
Мы эту баланду выпивали через...
We drank from metal bowls. They gave us a ladle of balanda and a lump of bread.
Вот так вот выпивали его и пайку хлеба. Еле-еле нас заставлял холод работать еще, потому что если...
We could hardly work for the cold. If we didn't move or work, we would have frozen.
И когда человек хочет, ну, оправиться, забои.
When someone wanted to relieve themselves, they had to take their mittens off. By the time they undid their trousers, their hands were frozen. As soon as they pulled it out, it froze. Many people had their parts amputated. There were no injections, anything to reduce pain. They didn't even have proper scalpels. When I was in the camp, they asked me to hold out my frostbitten foot, and with pliers, they just took chunks out. That was the treatment, the operation.
Вот и все лечение, вся операция.
It was considered that if you survived the first winter, you'd get through your sentence. Most people didn't survive.
большинство не выдерживало.
Stalin's henchmen tried to justify what was happening.
Мы можем прямо сказать, что НКВД своей разобщительной работой, раскрытием шпионских организаций не только спас много жизней, которым угрожала опасность от врагов, шпионов, диверсантов, разведчиков.
Applauding the message was the loyal construction worker Tatyana Fyodorova.
А то, что какие-то вот такие политические интриги, игры, которые были, есть и будут, к сожалению.
The fact is that unfortunately you always have political intrigues, machinations of this kind.
Не заслонило движение вперед никак.
It was a very hard time, but it didn't derail the movement forward in any way, because the country was growing at great speed. We're talking about a country of many millions. The whole population worked, sang songs. It doesn't mean that everything was extinguished, everything was lost.
Это не значит, что сразу все куда-то погасло и все пропало. Нет. Нет.
The state film studios tried to beguile Soviet audiences into thinking these were normal times, producing escapist musicals to match Hollywood's. On the surface, for those of its people it had not devoured, the great communist experiment could claim to have achieved some of its aims by the end of the 1930s. The vast majority were able to read. Great construction projects like the Moscow Metro had been completed, whatever the cost. And many Soviet citizens had opportunities of work they'd never had before. After her early time as a village teacher, Anastasia Denisova had moved to the city.
Открыл глаза немножко на мир. Все ждала, все, что
The revolution opened my eyes to the world. It gave me everything. I was wearing birch bark sandals when I came to Moscow to study. I didn't reach any great heights after studying, but my eyes were opened.
Но глаза все-таки открылись.
In 1917, the communists had been a small minority. They'd imposed their idea on their fellow countrymen, hoping to persuade them with the results. But 20 years later, even the early believers knew the promise that the oppressed masses will themselves form the government had not been delivered.
Мы поняли, что это самый главный враг социализма. Значит, мы поняли, что
He was the greatest enemy of socialism.
этому делу. Тем, что он уничтожил.
He had damaged socialism by destroying people in all parts of life, in agriculture, the arts, the military, and the party. He destroyed people everywhere.
Везде он всех их уничтожил.
Wasn't that evil against those great goals we had in mind?
Злом для той, великой, светлой цели, о которой мы все время говорим.
In the second half of the 1930s alone, over 7 million people were executed, and an estimated 7 million sent to the camps.
У Сталина не было
There was no socialism of any kind under Stalin. Stalin himself destroyed all socialism. If it hadn't been Stalin, it would have been someone else. Someone would have destroyed this system because, probably, the time had not yet come for such a society.
Для такого общества.
In the camps, ordinary men and women toiled and died as a result of a political system whose rhetoric and utopian promise became one of the most powerful forces affecting the century. And far from dying, the communist system would go on to dominate the lives of many more people after the end of the Second World War, bringing the same popular hopes and the same vicious realities.